Inside Crime is brought to you by Deterra. The Deterra system helps stop opioid misuse before it starts. With Deterra, unused prescription opioids and other drugs are gone for good. Learn more at deterrasystem.com. I'm Angeline Hartmann. As a journalist, I've worked with cops and victims of crime all over the country. My craft is storytelling. My passion is crime fighting. Welcome to Inside Crime, everybody. We're bringing you today's episode from the home of my friend Steve Murphy. If you're a fan of the very popular Netflix show Narcos, you know the name Steve Murphy very well. Steve is a retired special agent with DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. Steve Murphy and his partner Javier Pena are the two DEA investigators responsible for taking down the notorious Colombian drug lord Pablo Escobar. Now, Pablo Escobar was the leader of the Medellin cartel and often referred to as the king of cocaine. To help put this in perspective for you, federal investigators say Pablo Escobar was the wealthiest criminal in history. They say he had an estimated known net worth of between $25 to $30 billion. That was in the early 1990s.
Imagine you were born in a poor family, in a poor country. And by the time you were 28 years old, you have so much money you can't even count it. What do? Welcome to the Medellin cartel. Pablo was pulling in more than $5 million a week.
That's just a little taste from season 1 of Narcos. The series began in 2015. The first 2 seasons chronicle the work of Steve Murphy and Javier Pena. The hunt for Pablo Escobar is told through their perspective. It is cutting-edge television. And Netflix is about to launch season 4 of Narcos, coming up here on November 16th. Today, we'll hear from the real Steve Murphy about how this all turned into a hit television show. Steve will separate fact from fiction and break down some myths about the world's most powerful drug lord. Since the success of Narcos, the real Steve Murphy and Javier Pena travel around the world for speaking engagements, and thousands turn out for their shows to find out what we're going to talk about right here on Inside Crime. First, let's start off with one more glimpse into Narcos.
I'm Steve Murphy, drug enforcement agent.
What do you do at the United States Embassy?
I am in janitorial services.
Your embassy must be very clean.
You bet your ass it is. This is my partner, Javier Pena, who figured the best way to get inside narco information was to hang out with the same women they did.
Can anybody in this country keep a secret?
Everybody works for somebody.
They were violent, crazy, and filthy rich. Guys used to getting what they want. One way or another.
Welcome to Inside Crime, the famous Steve Murphy.
Thank you very much, but I don't know where that famous part came from.
What are you going to tell your grandchildren?
Don't believe everything you see on television.
Yeah.
You know, the show Narcos is famous on Netflix. I mean, it's a huge hit. We have been told unofficially that it ranks right at the top of shows with Netflix. Of course, Netflix won't tell you much, but and we might be a little prejudiced. We believe it's one of the top shows. But that's what's famous. The actors are famous. Mm-hmm. Javier and I, we're just professional law enforcement officers.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that, but obviously the story of Pablo Escobar is an incredible story, right, from beginning to end. It's fascinating to me that your story, this whole story, was not told in this fashion until now, with your cooperation, with your input. Can you I mean, you had to have had questions or offers before Narcos, right?
You know, and we get
Or were
asked
you
this-
hiding all this time?
No.
We had to wait till you were closer to retirement, or you...
No, actually, the truth is, and people think we're being humble when we say this, but this is the absolute truth. We honestly did not believe anybody wanted to hear this story because it was so old.
Right.
So I've been in the Washington, D.C. area since 2009. This is my second time living here. And during that time, a local friend of mine is a small-time producer. He introduced us to two Hollywood producers. And, you know, they said they were very interested in our story, wanted to make a movie out of it, things like that. Well, once we met with them, one guy had a personal agenda. He wanted to make a political statement out of our story, and that's not what we wanted at all. And the second guy, to be honest with you, I'm still not sure what his agenda was, but it was obvious it wasn't going to work out.
And this was around what year?
That would have been probably 2010 or 11.
Okay. So
Then-
still, I mean, many years had passed since
Oh, yeah.
this experience for you.
Yeah, and people say, well, you know, when you transferred out of Colombia, didn't people ask you questions all the time? Not many people knew that Javier and I were the case agents on that. I mean, I'm about as white as you get. I'm come from an English-Irish background, and living in Colombia, obviously, I did not blend in very well.
What?
You know, these light-colored eyes and not having any hair doesn't help any. But, you know, when you get to a new DEA office, the guys check you out before you get there just because you don't want to know what the personality of the person is that's coming. But it wasn't like you walk into an office and say, hey, I'm Steve Murphy. I killed Pablo Escobar. What'd you do? You know, if it came up in conversation, we talked about it, but it never came up in conversation. So it's not a big deal. You know, the truth is it was one case. You know, just like any other agent works a case, when that case is over, you move on to the next case.
And they've got their own cases.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you don't expect popularity, you don't expect recognition, you don't expect rewards, you don't expect anything. You're expected to do your job.
Right.
And then when that case is over, you move on to the next case. And that's exactly what Javier and I did.
Well, I think there are parallels in lots of jobs. I mean, I was a reporter for a long time, right? So for us, it's always about, you can do the big Pulitzer Prize story of the day or what, you know, the next day it's like, what do you have today?
That's right. Well, that's
Right?
the government way.
Right,
What did
so-
you do for me today?
Yeah, that was yesterday's story. Let's move on. Tell me about today. What's the top story for today?
Right.
So I imagine it's the same kind of
Right.
principle.
And
Pablo who? That was last week.
Right, exactly. Well, and you know what? And that's kind of the way we felt about it as well. So he was killed in December 1993, and here it was 2010, 2011 when we talked to these producers, and that's why we didn't think anybody'd be interested. And, you know, through the years, people that did know us, they said, you should do something with a movie, you should write a book, and we thought, nah, that's not what we are, that's not what we do. We're cops. We both love being law enforcement. And the other stuff just seemed like an unattainable dream, to be quite honest with you. Well, then in 2013, at that point, Javier and I were both senior executive service members within DEA, which, you know, as you know, is the highest ranks in DEA without getting a presidential appointment. And we were very happy in our jobs. We were both going to be 57, which is the mandatory retirement age in the federal government for law enforcement. And later in 2013, and the administrator at that time offered us both a 3-year extension, which she has the option to do. Now, at that time, my two daughters were in college, and I had to have a job after DEA, so I accepted the extension because I was happy doing what I was doing.
Sure.
In February of 13, I got a phone call from a U.S. Marine that was retired that we'd worked with in Colombia. Hadn't talked to him in over 20 years. Calls me on my cell phone, which was kind of surprising. And after we caught up on the phone, I said, so his name's Gil. I said, Gil, why are you calling? What's going on here? He said, well, there's a guy in Hollywood wants to meet you. And I said, you know what? We've been down this road before. It never works out. You get your hopes up. Then when things don't work out, you get disappointed. And it just reinforces the idea that really nobody wants to hear this story. Mm-hmm. And Gil, if you know any retired Marines, at times they can be a little colorful in their language. And so he kind of let me have it on the phone. And you know, I haven't talked to you in over 20 years, and you can't do me a simple favor. And he's a good friend, you know. And finally I gave in. I said, look, I'll call the guy, okay? Just don't beat me up. So I called a guy named Eric Newman in Hollywood. Now, Eric is the originator, the creator, and the executive producer of the hit Netflix series Narcos. The first conversation I had with Eric, he told us what he wanted to do, or he told me what he wanted to do, and I turned him down.
What did he say to you that made you turn it down?
that he wanted to take our story and develop it into now originally this was going to be a movie, a 2-hour movie. But once they started doing their research, they being the writers of Narcos, they realized there was no way they could capture this. So that's why it became a series instead of a movie. So he said, he said, we want to tell the true story. Obviously we can't do it without you two guys, without Javier Pena and I. And I said, we've been down this road before. We're not interested. Thanks very much. Eric said, he's a very pleasant man. He said, if I come to Washington, would you just have dinner with me? I'll bring 2 writers. There'll be 3 of us plus you. Just have dinner. We'll take you out to dinner, a nice restaurant. And at the end of the conversation, if you say no, then it's no. And quite honestly, I'm thinking, well, here's a free meal. So I agreed to do that. And, of course, I'm talking to Javier on the phone, keeping him up to date on what's going on. And before we met Eric, we did our research on him and both writers. Found out that all 3 of them are very well educated. They're very successful in Hollywood. Eric comes from a Hollywood family background. His father is Randy Newman, who wrote a lot of the songs for some of the older movies in California or in Hollywood. So when I walked in the restaurant that night, I found them sitting there, and when we sat down, we made our introductions, and I started asking them questions about themselves. And they got this surprised look, and they're like, "How do you know all this?" And I'm pointing at myself, going, "Hey, trained criminal investigator here," making a joke. But the reason I do that is I like to lighten the mood. I'm somewhat of an idiot, and I prefer to have fun, rather than being serious all the time. There's times you have to be serious, but not all the time. So we sat down, and for about the next 3 hours, had a great meal, got to know these guys. Our personalities clicked. At the end of the evening, Eric asked, he said, "So what are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to call Javier as soon as I get home. My recommendation is let's pursue this with you and see where it goes."
Javier might say no. He didn't get invited to dinner.
That's exactly right. And you know what? I don't make the decisions for both of us. It's always been a joint venture, and that mutual respect is why we're still good friends. So, and then Eric, before we walked out the door, he said, "Listen, let me ask you one more question. Why are you guys so hesitant to do something with this story?" And I told him, I said, "Eric, the last thing that either one of us want is that somebody would take this mass murderer, the world's first narco-terrorist, and glorify him in any way that you can imagine." And I said, "You know what? You might be a great producer and be, a man of ethics and integrity, but not everybody in Hollywood is. And we're very hesitant to give this story to anybody that would glorify him, to make him look like he's somebody special, because he's not." And right then, Eric promised me, he said, "I promise you and Javier, we will never do anything to glorify Pablo Escobar." Now, that was in March of 13. Here we are in late 2018, and the man has lived up to his word every time, in our opinion. Now, some people think Narcos glorifies that lifestyle. We don't agree with that. We think it portrays it very close to what reality is, although it's much more violent than what they show on television.
Well, so in your opinion, what would have been like the wrong approach? Like, let's say, what would you have seen that, when you're talking about glorifying?
Well, that they would represent him as anything other than what he was. Now, there's this myth out there that Pablo Escobar was a Robin Hood, that he took from the rich, gave to the poor. Now, he did do some good things, and I really hesitate to give this guy credit for anything good, but he actually did. He went in, and there were people who were living on the edge of a trash dump in Medellin, Colombia. The food they got came out of the dump. The
Wow.
pieces of wood and cardboard, things that you might use for housing, came out of the trash dump. Their clothes came out of the trash dump. Mm-hmm. These people had nothing, had no education, and the hopes of them ever doing better for themselves was pretty small. So he did go in and build housing and let these people live there for free. He built clinics, medical clinics. He built soccer fields. He gave away food. He gave away cash. Believe it or not, I mean, if you got $30+ billion, you can afford to give away cash, right? Mm-hmm. So he did do some good things, but, and there's always a but, he didn't do this out of the goodness of his heart. Now, so everybody says, "Oh, well, he took from the rich and gave to the poor, so that makes him a Robin Hood." Well, you know what? He was surrounded by what we call sicarios. Sicario is the Spanish word for assassin, murderers, okay? So at one point in his heyday, he had as many as 500 sicarios protecting him. He had a small army, right? Mm-hmm. Well, they're always in gun battles with the Colombian National Police, Colombian military, the different factions, the Cali cartel, their competitors. So a lot of the sicarios are being killed off. When Pablo needed to recruit new sicarios, where do you think he went to recruit? He went right back to that barrio where these people think he's a god. Because think about it. Now you've got food on your table. You've got a roof over your head. You've got a door maybe that locks, so you have a little bit of security all of a sudden in your life. Things you've never had before.
And now these people feel indebted to you.
Exactly. And so when he would come in, he'd say, I love you. He would hug them. He would kiss these people, especially the younger guys. I mean, he treated them with a certain amount of respect, although he was still king. And then he said, my friends, I'm here to recruit. I need to find people who are willing to kill for Pablo, who are willing to die for Pablo. And he might say, I need 50 guys. The sad truth is maybe 300 would step up. I mean, that's how much they thought of this guy. So rather than him being a Robin Hood, what we refer to him as is a master manipulator, because he manipulated all those people into thinking he's the best thing since sliced bread, to the point that they were willing to give their lives for him. So there's nothing magnanimous about Pablo Escobar whatsoever. Again, he is nothing more than a mass murderer. We attribute 10 to 15,000 murders to Pablo, directly to Pablo. Now, there's only one Sicario that Sicario, the assassin, that's still alive in Colombia. They refer to him as Popeye. Popeye is a free man. He was in prison with Pablo. Popeye has admitted on film that he killed as many as 300 people himself, that he arranged the murders of as many as 3,000 people. And this man's a free man in Colombia. But Popeye says, where we say 10 to 15,000, Popeye says the number is more like 50,000 people that Pablo Escobar is responsible for murdering.
50,000.
50. Here in the United States, if somebody kills 5 people, we call them a mass murderer. Mm-hmm. What do you call a person that kills 50,000 people? So there is nothing to be glorified about this guy at all. And that was the nice thing about Eric. Man, these writers are unbelievable. The research they had done, they were telling me things I didn't know. When we go to Hollywood, we'd sit in the writer's room for a week. They had shelves of books all about the Medellin cartel, the drug trafficking, the history of drug trafficking, everything. These guys are extremely well-read and educated on the topic. So, again, in our opinion, Eric Newman lived up to his word. I've got a lot of respect for him.
That's very nice to hear, because definitely it could have gone a different way.
Absolutely, and it's
and that happens, and then you've already committed, you've already signed the paperwork,
Yep. Well, and that was the sticking factor with us on the contract with the companies to produce Narcos, was we were worried it wasn't the money. We sold them our life rights to the story on Pablo Escobar. It was who's going to get access, because there was a clause in there that they had the right to transfer our story to another production company. And that was our biggest concern. And Eric put our fears to rest, so we've never worried about it since.
Wow. Are you surprised that the show became so popular and it has had such an amazing following, that was really only a few years ago,
So the first season came out in 2015.
2015.
Yep.
And then one season every year after that.
It's, again, there's nobody more surprised than Javier Pena about the success, the popularity of this story. I think, one, it's a story beyond belief. You and I have known each other a long time, and I'm nobody special. Yeah, and you know what Javier and I really are? We tell this on the stage when we do our show, is we're nothing more than a couple of small-town country boys that got to work a really big criminal case, and that's the absolute truth. I'm not trying to be humble by saying that. That's the truth. So,
and really, I will tell you, that is the beauty of this story, if you think about it, because that is part of the story. Right?
And other people have told us that. It's, it makes you feel good, but it's a little bit embarrassing when they say that also.
And I'm sure you've heard over the years, as the more the story is told in these different ways. Even back then, you guys were called everything from heroes to super agents to, whatever.
And sometimes we're called murderers and assassins. Mm-hmm. That happens at some of the shows we do around the world, mm-hmm. where people will yell at us.
No kidding.
Yep. Doesn't happen very often, but it has happened. And, usually security's there and they'll escort the people out. But the reason we do these shows is because we want the world to know the truth. Now, Narcos, I love it. I love the show. I think Eric, I think Netflix, I think the actors are phenomenal. The guy that played me, Boyd Holbrook, we got to be pretty good friends. He stayed at my house here. Pedro Pascal that plays Javier is just, he's a heartthrob for all the ladies out there, which Javier seems to love that part to go along with it. Wagner Moura that played Pablo Escobar. Oh my goodness, what a phenomenal actor. My wife and I were watching season 2 of Narcos, and that's where they portray that Pablo went and hid out with his father on a farm or a ranch. Now, we don't know that's true, because if we did, we'd have gone and got him, right? So that's Hollywood. But we're watching that part, and all of a sudden, Wagner's such a good actor. I started feeling sorry for Pablo. And then, reality comes back. I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? That's Pablo Escobar. But that's the level of an actor that Wagner Moura portrayed in that show. And even the actress that played my wife, Connie's portrayed in the show, Joanna Christie, you probably don't know this. She's British.
No.
She was able to hide her British accent and talk kind of like a Southern girl, because you can tell I'm not a New Yorker from my accent. But she did a phenomenal job portraying my wife as well. So, but back to your original question, why is this so popular? It seems like people outside the United States believe what they see in these shows, and so our goal is to tell the truth. We say that at the beginning of every show we do, and we do a lot of shows around the world. What you're going to hear today is the absolute truth. We don't embellish. We don't pretend. We're not trying to pretend that we're something we're not. We're not tough guys. We're not Superman. We were just a couple of professional law enforcement officers that got to work this really big case.
And I think, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I think your goal in telling the truth, or you tell me, what is your goal in telling the truth? Because you want people to know what?
Well, a lot of it goes back to your original or the original discussion about glorification of Pablo, because especially with young people. So when you're talking to a group of high school seniors and they're watching, these guys, they binge watch, and not only Narcos, but they watch all the shows that are out there, and they think, wow, that is so cool. Look how much money they have. They have the girls, they have the fancy cars, the big houses, the vacations, private jets, all those things that well, not just a young person. Most people think that's pretty good to have. Even I think that'd be pretty good to have. But what we stress to them is this is not a job or a career path that you get into where you do it for a couple of years and say, okay, I'm done, and walk away. There's only one way to get out of that career path, and that's a bullet to the head. That's how violent, that's how vicious the drug traffickers are around the world. And it's not just the Colombian drug traffickers. This is true of criminals around the world. I tell them there are criminals out here on the street where we live here in the D.C. area that if you die will pry the gold out of your teeth because they think it's worth something. And they all laugh when I say that, but it's the truth. You and I know that's the truth. There are just so many evil people out there waiting to take advantage of you and me. So I think when we say we're telling the truth, we definitely want the young people to understand this is not an occupation you want to get involved with. It's not something to be glorified. There is no good outcome to this. Are there some lucky criminals out there that never get arrested? Sure there are. But there's probably more that get arrested than not.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing because really Hollywood is Hollywood, right? And they tell a great story. And I think what you're doing is following up with that story and filling in the blanks.
We are.
Right? And you are telling the real story behind the story.
Right.
So here's the Hollywood version, and then here's the real story you follow up with. So I think it's great, and I'm so glad to hear that you guys have been successful and there's been interest around the world in hearing more from you guys.
Well, and here's one really prominent example. So if you remember in season 2, they show Javier giving classified information to the vigilante group Los Pepis. Now, Los Pepis is every bit as bad as Pablo Escobar. They're just a group of murderous vigilantes. They're murderers themselves. But in the show, they portray Javier passing classified information to them. Of course, that never happened. That's Hollywood. But you'd be shocked how many places we go outside. It doesn't happen too much in the United States, but outside the United States, people will ask Javier, how could you keep your job with DEA when you were corrupt, when you were passing that classified information? They believe what they saw on television.
Man.
So in our presentation, Javier has about a little 2-minute skit he does to explain how that all happened. And we try to introduce humor into our presentations because this is a very dark topic. We're talking about, murder. We start out with a dead man on our screen. So you have to lighten the mood because we're not there to
scare people.
Exactly.
Or
we just want the truth to be told.
Right.
And that's what we're doing.
Yeah. When you guys started this project, if you will, did you realize that there would be this follow-up, the telling?
No.
You
never in a million years. you hear about these things that you never expected in your life to happen in your life. Well, this is one of them.
So did you watch the show when it first came out? Like, were you watching the cuts as they went each time, or how did that work for you?
No, so originally we thought, when we signed the contracts, we thought that they would have us down in Colombia because they filmed the first 2 seasons in Colombia. So we thought they'd have us there on the set for, and I'm thinking, both of us were wondering, well, how the heck are we going to be able to get home with our families and, if we're going to be out of country so much? Well, that wasn't it at all. It shows you how little we know about Hollywood.
They FaceTimed you in.
No, they brought us to Hollywood and we'd sit in the writer's room. And then the writers would email us and call us with questions. And, can you explain this a little further? Have you got a description of this? Have you got a photograph that's similar? Things like that. So
it's an interesting process, isn't it?
It's something I'd never seen before. You know what? And what a cutthroat industry. I think that probably shocked me more than anything.
Because to even get to that point, Steve, like you said, there's pitches and meetings and pitches and meetings.
Well, and just to back up a little bit for us, apparently it went very quickly because I met Eric in March of 2013. By May, we had signed contracts. So, and so that I retired at the end of June. In July, we were sitting in the writer's room in Hollywood. That was our first week out there. So towards the end of filming for season 1 is when Eric called and says, hey, we'd like for you to come down to Colombia, to Bogota. We're getting close to the end of filming season 1. And we worked it out so my wife and 2 daughters could go with me. Now, my 2 daughters are Colombian by birth. We adopted them down there. That's all true. And they have never been back since they were little. My youngest was 5 months old when she left Colombia. She's never been back. They have no idea what Colombia was like. So we were able to take them down for the last week of filming of season 1 of Narcos to Bogota. Nice. We prepared them for the way we remembered Colombia. There's going to be police patrols. There's going to be military patrols. Everybody carries a gun. You're going to see Jeeps with machine guns mounted on the back. You're going to see people getting questioned. We may get stopped and questioned. Just, stay here close with mom and dad. We won't go out at nighttime. Things like that. When we got to Colombia, we told them the airport is kind of like a third world airport. It's kind of dirty. It's all gray concrete. It just kind of looks a little bit nasty, but just stick with mom and dad, and they're adults by now, young adults. When we landed at the airport in Bogota, we didn't know they'd built a new airport. We got off the plane, and my wife and I were looking around, thinking we landed at the wrong airport.
Right.
So, and then that continued. What we saw is Colombia has progressed so much.
It'd been, 20, 30 years?
It had been. We left in 1994. So we were extremely pleased to see that. And then we were fine. Bogota is just like any other city just like a city in the United States. There's parts of Washington, D.C. you don't go to unless you want to get mugged or you might get hurt, right? Sure. Same in Bogota. So we were up on the north end. We were staying in the Zona Rosa area. We were fine. We were going to restaurants. We were going shopping. We would go out to Netflix functions. We had a great trip down there. So that was our participation in season 1. Season 2, we worked with the writers, but towards the end of filming, we got a phone call from Eric, and he said, listen, we need you guys in Bogota in a couple of weeks. So, they arrange all your flights and everything for you. And so we fly down there, and I called him when we got to the hotel, and I said, so what's going on? And he said, well, tomorrow there's a van will pick you up. The production van will pick you up and bring you to the set. And, you can see the set for season 2 and all that, and then they're going to take you to wardrobe and makeup. I'm like, well, wait a minute, Eric, we're not the actors. We're the real guys, right? He said, well, we got a little surprise for you. And what they did is they gave us a little cameo appearance at the end of season 2 in episode 10. Now, if you see it, you don't know who we are. Nobody knows who we are. and our cameo lasts for like a whole 2 seconds. But,
it's a nice little secret if you're in on it,
It is. And occasionally, I think I saw the Hollywood Reporter or one of the magazines out in Hollywood picked up on it. And it's been reported a few times. But most people don't realize we're actually in the last episode of season 2.
It's kind of fun that way.
It is. It is.
You really have to pay attention, even in the openings of even in the show opening. Like there's real pictures weaved in
Right.
with the Hollywood stuff.
Right.
You got to really pay attention, and maybe you don't know, is that made up? Is that from his real? There are real pictures.
Yep.
Real.
We're there. You know, and one myth that everybody seems to think is that we got phenomenally wealthy because of this. I'll be the first to tell you. You know.
No.
Oh no.
So,
no. What we got?
So I'm paying for lunch today, is what you're saying?
Thank you very much. You offered. We got it on tape. I'll be honest with you. Between my federal government retirement check and what I got from Netflix each year, I made more money when I was working as a DE agent. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you know, most people think. I thought, well, heck, I'm never going to have to work again. That's not it at all. But you know what? We're getting the true story out there. And quite honestly, what Narcos did for us is it kicked off our speaking business.
Yes.
So it's doing very well.
Because it's not really about the show. It's about that's the stepping stone for you and what you do with it afterwards,
Right.
which is very common for other people who have their own shows similar to yours. And I'm just so happy to hear that it really is working out for you and people are still interested. And
Wow. Again,
you just,
we're shocked.
when you're hot, man.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
So you just got to go with it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And ride the wave as long as
you can. So we're in the process of writing a book now. It won't come out probably until September or October of 2019.
it's awesome.
But it not only will focus on Escobar, but it will talk about a little bit about our childhoods and how we got into law enforcement, the different agencies we worked for, and there's going to be some more stories in there, and a lot of personal stories about our families. And again, we'll be shocked if anybody buys the book, but hey, we were shocked that Narcos was a hit too. So shows you how much we know.
Well, so season 1 and season 2 focused on the rise and fall of Pablo Escobar, and you guys weaved into that. Season 3.
So what we did is most people don't know this. I was in Colombia for 3 years, from June 91 to June 94. Javier got there in 1988 and stayed until September 94. He was there 6.5 years. And then in 1999, he went back for another 2 years, and that's when they took down the Cali cartel. So season 3 is about the Cali cartel, the demise of that organization, and that's why Javier's character is in season 3. Now, he was there as the number 2 boss in the DEA offices of the U.S. Embassy. In reality, the bosses don't go out and jump out of helicopters and go on jungle patrols, things like that. But man, they did a great job, portraying a good action series. But what we did is we introduced them to the 3 agents that were responsible for bringing down the Rodriguez-Orjuela brothers and the Cali cartel. Now, Netflix chose to only bring on board one of those agents, Chris Feistel, and he's portrayed in season 3. But he really is, like Javier and I were
The real deal.
For Pablo, he was for the Cali. Season 4 coming out, I can't tell you too much about that, but we did introduce him to the agents that were involved in what you're going to see in season 4. So just like seasons 1, 2, and 3, you're going to hear the real story. Now, there's going to be a lot of Hollywood in there, but the premise is true. And one thing that we're really excited about is they're going to portray the story of Kiki Camarena, who was the DEA agent that was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered in Mexico back in the early 1980s. If you go back to season 1, and I think it might even be episode 1, the guy that plays Murphy, there's a line in there that says, it's something like, Kiki Camarena was the Jesus Christ of DEA. He died so that we could live. And I mean, that's Hollywood. It's very biblical, right?
Mm-hmm. I remember that, though.
And we had asked him, could you do something to give credit to Kiki in there? Because it did. The way the United States government responded to Mexico after Kiki's death had a lot to do with keeping Javier and I alive in Colombia. Now, there's other reasons also, but that was right there at the top, right? So we're really excited that's going to be in season 4 because, the man made the ultimate sacrifice. He gave his life. And they, what the reports are that they killed Kiki and they had a doctor on standby and they would inject adrenaline into his heart and bring him back to life so that they could kill him again. I can't imagine the horror that this man went through. So he deserves every bit of recognition that he can possibly get. Will there be Narcos after season 4? I'm not allowed to say, but
You never know.
maybe.
Maybe. I just want to, earlier you mentioned the term, And some people know what it means, and maybe younger people, some people don't. You describe, and I think this is very common, you described Pablo Escobar as the first narco-terrorist.
Correct.
What does that mean? How do you explain that?
So, well, the first thing we'll tell an audience, what is a narco-terrorist? Because we like to challenge the audience. We try to get audience participation, but in my mind, a narco-terrorist is basically a narcotics trafficker that employs terroristic activities in his criminal activities. So what did Pablo do? He introduced car bombs. We had never seen that in law enforcement. That was something that the terrorist groups participated in. That was more an intel community type activity. So the fact that he's introducing these car bombs, which are responsible for killing thousands of innocent people who just simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, that's why we refer to him. The amount of torture that he employed, especially to anyone he suspected of being an informant against him. We've got photographs that we show in our show that are just, we don't leave on the screen very long because it shows how evil this guy could really be, the things that he does to a human being while they're still alive, trying to extract information. So that's, when we say he's a narco-terrorist, that's what we're talking about. And he's recognized. I mean, I believe you were affiliated with America's Most Wanted at one point. Well, I don't know if you remember, but back during that time, you guys actually did one episode of The World's Most Wanted.
Yes.
And when they sent the film crew down, I took them to Medellin for a week, and they did all their filming. And, that's how bad this guy was. He was the world's most wanted criminal. Mm-hmm. Not just because of that show, but literally he was the world's most wanted criminal. I saw an article on the internet maybe 4 to 6 weeks ago, and it ranked the 15 richest criminals of all time. Guess who's still number one?
No kidding.
Pablo Escobar. Nobody even comes close to the wealth that he amassed. We say that Pablo was worth, actually this came out of Forbes magazine, that he was the seventh richest person in the world. This was in the early 1990s. They estimated his wealth at between $8 and $30 billion. I've been a cop my whole life. What's $1 billion? I don't even know how much.
Know.
Exactly. No. I'd love to find out, wouldn't you? But when that article came out, it's reported that Pablo's son, Juan Pablo, called Forbes magazine and told him, you got it all wrong. It's a whole lot more than $30 billion. So the truth is, we really don't know how much this guy was worth. Mm-hmm. But when I looked at this chart, I mean, Chapo Guzman, the Mexican who's getting ready to stand trial in New York City soon, his estimated wealth, he's very well known internationally. Estimated wealth is $1 billion. We're talking about Pablo, who was $30+ billion. Nobody even comes close to him.
It was a different time back then, and it was just getting, the whole industry, if you will, was getting started.
It was, and again, not to give him too much credit, but you know what? He introduced a business model of cocaine trafficking that nobody in the world had ever seen, to the point where he was responsible for as much as 80% of the cocaine in our world. It started out in the United States, but then it grew into Europe, and then it spread throughout the rest of the world. Oh. So there's a few reasons as to how Pablo became the number one cocaine trafficker of all time.
Inside Crime is brought to you by Deterra. The Deterra drug deactivation system is an independently tested, safe, and environmentally sound solution that permanently deactivates, destroys, and disposes of unneeded pills, patches, liquids, creams, and films right at home. Be part of the solution to reduce drug abuse. Learn more at deterrasystem.com.
There's a few reasons as to how Pablo became the number one cocaine trafficker of all time. One is that the business model that he introduced for his cocaine business was, well, I'll just give you an example. Let's say I'm Pablo and you're somebody that I want to do something for me, and I tell you what I want you to do. Well, you think it's illegal or it's unethical or whatever, it's immoral, and you say no. I just kill you. That sends a very powerful message to everybody else, right? So the next time I ask somebody to do something for me, as Pablo Escobar, And they say no, they know what their consequences are, right? Mm-hmm. Now, so you say a business model, but obviously you can't employ or you should not employ that practice in your business, right, of killing your competition or anybody that doesn't do what you want them to do. But that's what Pablo did. So he instilled a level of fear that people were afraid not to do what he told them. He started using a phrase called plata or plomo, which is Spanish for silver or lead. Do you want silver in the form of money, or do you want lead in the form of a bullet? And you know what? He would send his sicarios and his representatives to meet with these judges. Now, back during this time, a judge in Colombia really was the chief of the investigation. You know, they had the final say-so on bringing charges, dropping charges, additional investigation that needed to be done, additional evidence that needed to be collected, all that kind of stuff. So he would have maybe a couple of his representatives and go and see you as a judge that held a case against Pablo Escobar. And they would talk to you and they'd say, you know, we're representatives of Pablo Escobar. We understand you have these criminal charges against him. We would like for you to dismiss those. Of course, your initial reaction is going to be, get out of my office, right? Because that's what most people would do. No, I'm going to do my job, get out of my office. And then they'd say, well, listen, before we leave, can we just show you something? They'd pull an envelope out of their briefcase. Now, inside that envelope are photographs. And it might be your wife or your husband at their place of employment. It might be your children coming out of the school where they go. It might be your parents coming out of church. Do you recognize these photos? What we have in this briefcase here is $50,000, $100,000. Mr. Escobar would like for you to dismiss the charges, and this money is yours, tax-free, free and clear, no other expectations from you. If you don't, not only will we kill you, but we'll kill everybody in these photographs. The first judge they did it to stood up to him, get out of my office, had him escorted out of the building within a couple of days. They didn't kill him first. They killed his family first. They killed his parents, his children, his wife, and then they killed him so that he would know this is what happens when you don't deal with Pablo Escobar, when you don't do what this man asks you to do. So that's where the term plata or plomo comes from. The other thing about Pablo was he killed with no remorse. I don't think the man had a conscience. He had no guilt feelings whatsoever. It was just doing business. It was, in his world, I guess that was acceptable. To, you know, probably 90% of the rest of the world, it's not. You know, it's not the way we live with each other.
It is really something. And then to watch how they portray that on the show Narcos, I think is amazing.
It is. And you know what? I mean, as violent as it was, in real life, it was so much worse. There was a scene in season 1 where they took a prostitute, and Rodriguez Gacha, El Mexicano, has her tortured, and she's brutally raped repeatedly and things like that, and it's horrible. My sister saw that, and she couldn't watch the series anymore. But in real life, it was so much worse than what you saw on TV. I mean, if they put reality on there, most people wouldn't watch it at all. But that's why we want to stress to the high schoolers, this is not a career path you want to take.
Let's talk some fun stuff about Narcos.
Okay.
For real Narcos fans, right? As we know, the show is a Hollywood version of what really happened, the rise and fall of Pablo Escobar.
Right.
Told through your eyes, yours and your partner's. So when we say that's the Hollywood version, what's the truth there, Steve? How much is Hollywood and how much is real? Are you able to say? Like, is it 50-50, 90-10?
Well, what we usually tell people...
What's the inside scoop there?
What we usually tell people is you have to come to our show to find out, because we'll tell you what we think. But, I mean...
For Inside Crime, you're going to give us the
That's
real
it.
scoop.
Plus, you're an old friend. We think about a third of what you see is absolutely true. You know, that those events happen and they're depicted correctly. A lot of the violence, that's absolutely true. Then the second third, well, those events happen, but they're not depicted the way that they happened. Okay, so there's an example I give during the show, but I'd rather not say on your radio here on this interview. But events happen; they're just not portrayed the way they really happen. They made them more exciting. They've been Hollywoodized, right? And then that last third, boy, that's just straight out of Hollywood, and things
didn't happen at all.
Not at all.
Just for good storytelling.
Not at all. I mean, and you know what? I used to tell the writers, you guys are some sick puppies, because these ideas you're coming up with, holy cow. But they're that good at writing. They're that creative
To
in their
weave it all
minds.
in.
Oh yeah.
But you're laughing. Did it bother you when you saw the things that were untrue, or you were okay with? I mean, that's the way it goes. It's Hollywood.
Well, when you signed your contract, there was a clause in there that says that they had the right and authority to employ literary licensing as they saw fit. So you knew that to begin with. And Eric didn't hold back. He's very honest with us the whole time. And he said, hey, there's going to be a lot of untruths in here, but it's going to be an exciting show. And I mean, he was right.
The cat scene in the first season.
Yeah.
Of the whole cat situation.
So the scene you're talking about is where my wife and I come home and we find her cat has been murdered and hanging on the front door of our apartment. Well,
Hollywood.
I'll
Which
say
1/3 of it?
This is that second third. So the truth is, my wife did have a cat. The cat's name was Puff. We did have a really hard time getting Puff into the country, as was portrayed, in episode 2 of season 1. And you know what? Puff did die in Colombia. He died in Bogota. But Puff was old. He had a heart attack.
Puff just had a heart attack?
Yeah, he wasn't sacrificed by the sicarios and hung on our front door.
Man.
But you know what? After I saw that, I'm thinking, well, these writers are kind of sick to come up with something like that,
I totally fell for that.
Well, and that was the first.
So in other words, what you were saying earlier is correct. Puff did die.
Yes. But so it falls in that second
third.
Not portrayed accurately. And that's probably the first 2 or 3 years of Narcos. That was the most frequently question we got, because every show we do, there's always a question and answer opportunity at the end. And you can ask us anything. You ask about the investigation, about Narcos, about any of the other shows we've been on. And we'll even talk about our personal lives to a certain degree. So that's a very popular question.
So when we get to season 2, at some point, your wife, Connie, decides to head back to the United States.
That falls into that last third. That absolutely did not happen. So, and there's a story that goes with this. You're going to love it.
Well, I'm thinking Connie's sitting there going, man.
Well, so when Hollywood when Eric and his crew would write an episode, they would email it to Javier and I, and we would read through it, and we would look for little things that we could pick out, maybe things in the background to make it a little more authentic, or we went through this thing for a while about the type of weapons we carry because they wanted to be accurate, and quite honestly, that never happened. But it was that kind of thing. So we had the opportunity to read those right after they were written. Well, I'd read it, and I would make my notes, and then Connie would read it because her character's portrayed in there. And when she read that, boy, she came to me. She starts fussing at me. She's like, that's not true. I never left you. I've never left you. I've always stayed by your side, which is absolutely true. She has. And I'm looking at her going, baby, I'm backing up because I'm afraid she's going to hurt me. I go, baby, I didn't write it. This is the writers in Hollywood. So a couple, and then it got to be funny. Well, a couple weeks later, Eric Newman called and he's asking me questions. And I'm here in my house, when I'm on the phone talking, I walk. So I walk through the kitchen, the dining room, the living room, into the foyer, back in the kitchen. I just kind of make a circle around the house. I guess it's nervous energy. And so I came walking by her talking on the phone, and she said, well, who's that? And I'm in a conversation. I said, it's nobody. Well, you know how you ladies are. That radar comes up. Now she starts listening. And she comes in a few minutes. She goes, that's Eric, isn't it? Give me the phone. And so she tore Eric up on the phone right there. And I'm feeling sorry for him. Oh, she let him have it. And he's telling her, Connie, it's Hollywood. I promise you it's Hollywood. We know you never left your husband's side. So, and then it got to be a big joke with all of us. But you know what? That's one of the things I love about her. She is, I don't think I'm a brave person. I think she is. When I first met Connie, I used to ride motorcycles, She owned her own motorcycle. So I always say,
my kind of girl.
How can you not love a woman that owns her own motorcycle, right?
Wow.
And she's not like a biker chick or anything. She's got an adventurous side to her. And I think that's probably why we've gotten along so well. We dated for a little over 3 years. We've been married for over 34 years now. So I guess it's going to last.
You might keep her around.
She might keep me around. That's always a question.
Yeah. No, I can understand, how she would be frustrated with that. I mean, because it's just flat out not true. She didn't leave you. And it makes her look bad when you're watching the show.
It does. But just, this better than I do. successful television is based on conflict, right? Conflict and drama. And that's what it created, was conflict and drama between Steve and Connie in the show.
And it gave them an opportunity to open up your character, because now you're experiencing something that you wouldn't have had if she would have stayed with you, right? So she
Right.
leaves, and now in the show, they show you going through a dark period, right? And so now we can get to know your character a little bit more, how you handle that,
Right.
and one thing leads to another.
Right.
So yeah. So I do understand, but I don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm with Connie.
Well, the truth is she's a professional registered nurse, for most of her adult life, well, all of her adult life. So that's what she majored in college. And I can't tell you how many times she's given up nursing for me, because with DEA, I've transferred, I think it was 8 or 9 times during my career. And, a lot of times, there's another fallacy in Narcos. It shows her working in a clinic in Bogota. The danger was so prevalent in Colombia, our spouses were not allowed to work outside the embassy. It was just too dangerous to let her go out in an environment like that.
So she did work. Did she work
did.
at the embassy?
She did.
She didn't work at the clinic.
Right. She
Okay.
in the embassy. She worked in the post office at the embassy for a while. Then she became the community liaison officer, which is, I like to joke around, that's the person plans all the parties for the embassy personnel. And then actually DEA hired her to work in our office probably the last year, until we adopted our first daughter, and then she became a stay-home mom.
So you tell me, take me back there, because in real life, you and Connie adopted 2 girls from Colombia.
Correct.
In the show, what happens?
Well, in the show, for the first daughter, her name is Olivia. Her real name's Monica. They show that Olivia's father was the person that Pablo employed to put the bomb on the Avianca flight. And he's actually the guy that detonated. He unwittingly did that. They told him that the briefcase contained a recording device, that Pablo wanted to record the conversation of the person that this guy would be sitting next to. And once they got in the air, just activate the recorder and engage the guy in conversation. And then when you land in Cali, somebody will come and get it from you, and Pablo could listen. Well, when he activated the recording device, it actually activated the bomb, which resulted in the death of 110 innocent people on a country's airliner. I mean, it's like flying United or American or US Air or Southwest or whatever you fly here in the United States. You think you're going to be safe. You're just flying from Bogota to Cali, and there's a bomb on there because Pablo thought the leading presidential candidate was going to be on that plane. And you know what the truth is? We were supposed to have 2 DEA agents on that flight that day that were going to go to Cali for investigative reasons. For whatever reason, at the last minute, the boss had something else for them to do, so they had to cancel their tickets, which is what saved their lives. Now, there's no indication that Pablo knew that. I'm not a believer in coincidence. I believe the good man upstairs plans everything out. Yeah. So I believe it just wasn't their time to die on that day. But so anyway, then, of course, the father of Olivia is killed on the plane crash. Then Pablo wants to eliminate any other witnesses, which would have been his wife. So they go kill her, and then there's the baby. Well, the Sicarios are getting ready to kill the baby, and that's when Murphy and Pena show up, and there's this running gun battle. None of that happened. That's Hollywood.
The run and gun battle never happened?
No. The truth is, my wife and I went through normal channels to adopt Monica. There was nothing spectacular about it. I mean, just
so the
great
baby
writers.
You adopted was not the baby of the guy?
No. No. She came from, we got her through an orphanage in a little town north of Bogota called Zipaquirá. She was 8 months old when we adopted her. She's now 25. I won't tell you where she lives, but she's out on her own. She's doing a great job.
And you adopted 2.
Right. So in season 2, it was always planned that they would show the second adoption. But for whatever reason, it got edited out at the last minute. The orphanage where we got her from is in Medellin in the city. It kind of sits down in a little bit of a valley, but on the hillside, Medellin's a mountainous area. On the hillside behind the orphanage is a building called the Monaco Building. That's where Pablo and his family lived, an 8-story condo building, and they were the only tenants. Of course, they owned it. But an 8-story building just for Pablo, his mother, his son, and his daughter. I mean, that's how wealthy this guy was. So, here's the shadow of this building shining over the orphanage where we were able to adopt our last daughter, our second daughter. And I can be honest with you, as we're driving out, you can imagine, this is after Pablo was dead. You can imagine the security detail that the embassy required and the Colombian National Police provided for my wife and I to go to Medellin, because there were still a lot of people, dedicated to Pablo, thought that he'd been done wrong, that he'd been murdered, not killed in a shootout, things like that. So we had this huge security detail, and as we're leaving the orphanage, I had the lieutenant of the detail stop. He thought we forgot something, and I just got around and I'm gonna tell you the truth. I turned around and I said, "Pablo, here's to you," and I gave my middle finger to the Monaco building. I just felt like you lost and I won.
Wow. That was a moment.
It was. It was personal.
Yeah.
Nobody else knows about it unless I tell you about it, but that was my own little personal victory.
Wow. Steve, what else do you want to talk about?
Well, it's kind of amazing that things that are kind of spin-offs of what Narcos started, so as I mentioned, we're writing a book which will come out next year. There have been other opportunities. We're traveling all around the world doing these shows, but it's starting to open doors for other opportunities. So Javier and I have partnered up with a group called the Partnership for Safer Medicines. Their focus is addressing counterfeit legal medications coming into the United States. So, one of the things that you can do now is you can go online and order your prescription medications from an online pharmacy in Canada, which is a lot cheaper than here in the United States. But the truth is that what you think you're buying from a Canadian pharmacy is probably somebody in Pakistan or India or China or Mexico sending you a placebo with no medical value whatsoever, or maybe they lace it with a few grains of fentanyl, because that when you take it, your body has a reaction to it. Well, if they get too many grains of fentanyl in there, you die. So what makes this important to us is this could be the perfect crime. So let's say that you're a cancer patient. You order your cancer meds online from what you think is a legitimate Canadian pharmacy that turns out to be these rogue criminals in another part of the world. You get a placebo. There's no fentanyl. It's just a placebo. It's a sugar pill or whatever it might be. You take that. You think, wow, I'm doing everything I can to fight cancer. And then you die. Well, there's no autopsy because all your friends, all your family, the doctors all knew you had cancer. It was inoperable. This was your last chance, and you died. So there's no autopsy. A crime has been committed but never gets investigated because of lack of awareness. So that's why we've teamed up with Partnerships for Safe Medicine. In addition to that, we've been approached, we've done a lot of documentaries and things like that. And so we've been approached about doing a potential TV series that would address the opioid, heroin, and fentanyl issues that we're facing primarily here in the United States. But you know what? This issue is affecting countries all around the world. And we'll see if this goes anywhere. We're hoping for a 10-episode series. I think this particular drug epidemic is probably more well known than a lot, but it's still not known completely because people are sitting back thinking, well, this doesn't affect me. Mm-hmm. You know what I tell people like that? I told this to Representative Comstock. I told this to the sheriff of our county, to anybody who listen to me. If you think that, you better take a closer look. Maybe it's not your immediate family, but look at your extended family. Maybe look at some of your friends, because I promise you, this is so devastating in our country right now. It's touching somebody in your circle of family and friends. I promise you it is. Nobody's immune from this.
It's a very scary situation, and we're so glad to hear that.
Well, we'll see. It's another. I look at life as an adventure.
I'm so excited for you and all of your adventures ahead, Steve.
Thank you very much.
It's really good to.
Well,
it's just really nice to see all of your success and you enjoying it and moving forward.
Well, we appreciate that. So if you want to contact us, just go to our website. That's www.deanarcos.com. You can see some of the places we've been. Our bios are on there. You can see some of the things we're involved with. There's an interactive calendar that'll show you where we're going to be and when. And there's also a place where you can contact us direct. So just click on that site. The emails will come to Javier and I direct, and we will get back to you and put you in touch with one of our agents.
Thank you, Steve. We're so glad you came on Inside Crime. We're just getting started here with this podcast, and it's a pleasure to have you.
Well, and from my perspective, it's an honor and a privilege to be here talking with you. We've, you and your husband, we've crossed paths before and been friends for a long, long time. So thank you guys for the invitation and the opportunity to tell the true story here.
And that's it for this episode of Inside Crime. I'm your host, Angeline Hartmann. I hope you enjoyed our show. If you have any feedback, just go to our website, insidecrime.com, and send us an email. Remember, you can always reach out to me on Twitter. My handle is @AngelineDC. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss an episode of Inside Crime.